Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening. And before we get into it, I really want to give a new follower and listener subscriber shout out. So a shout out to ATD Connolly, Josiah Eden, Wenji, Lyell76, Brooke, Shaz, S. Hanlon, Munsters 5, Sunflower, Leanna B, Goose, Barry, Chris, Lucas, and Lee. Thank you for subscribing and letting this podcast be part of your homesteading and gardening journey. All right, so let's dig into today's episode because this is the time of year where we're getting catalogues flying in our inboxes or through the mail. I know I've got at least 3. I'm hoping to get a few more because I really enjoy this time of year. I enjoy sitting down at the table with, a nice big cup of tea and just kind of perusing through catalogues and kind of seeing what's hot, what's new, what's trending for the garden because as I mentioned in another episode, sometimes you can find really cool plants that become available, but they're not available normally, as part of, kind of like the staples that these seed providers are providing. And I get asked all the time, what are some good varieties to grow? And I've definitely got a few favorites that I like to grow. And getting another gardener's favorite varieties to grow is actually a really good stepping point or springboard for you to try and, either try to grow them or to take a look at them online or, in a catalogue and see if it's something that you might actually want to grow. And I say that because sometimes some of the favorites of other gardeners that I've grown, I've not really liked, or they haven't grown very well, or I just straight up didn't quite like what they looked like, so I didn't grow them. And that's the kind of cool thing about gardening, really, is, it's your garden and you don't have to grow what somebody else says is their favorite variety. You can really grow what you want to, right? It's a blank canvas almost. You get to be the artist and wield the paintbrush and the paint and decide what it is that's going into your garden. So in this episode, I want to kind of talk through a few varieties that I've really enjoyed growing and are some that I often recommend other people try to grow. And I also want to kind of talk a little bit about some of the varieties that I've seen pop up in a couple of the catalogues that I think would be really cool to grow and something that would definitely be on my radar to be growing if I purchase seeds this year, which is kind of hard not to. I'm really trying to be good and not buy seeds because I've got a lot of seeds and I want to do more grow out and seed saving this year. But it's really difficult to turn it down. Kind of like, all the delicious food around this season. It's really difficult to turn that down. And I started a diet already. So apparently I'm just a sucker for punishment. So let's get down and start talking about some of these varieties that I often recommend. And I brought up a whole heap of seeds from my seed bank to kind of look at as I'm talking to you guys. So the first one is Restoration Romaine, and actually this is one that was a substitute that I got from a seed supplier. Because they didn't have the variety that I wanted to try. And this is a romaine type lettuce, and I really like romaine lettuces because they grow big, they're crispy, they're kind of pretty full bodied. And the only thing I don't particularly like about these type of lettuces is I always seem to find earwigs in them, which kind of creeps out my stepson. But this is a really good all-round romaine lettuce. It's straightforward and easy to grow. It's part of the open source seed initiative as well, which means that I can save the seed and I can use it in kind of breeding projects and things that I want to. But it's really good easy growing variety, and it produces really tasty lettuce, and I was really surprised at how easy it was to grow. So I think for people who like those kind of romaine type lettuces, that's a really good starter to go to. I also like a variety called Devil's Ear, which grows exceptionally well in the cooler weather for me. And it's definitely one that we go to year after year. Black-seeded Simpson is also another great variety to grow. It's kind of got those sort of butter leaf type of leaves on it, and it's a very good kind of cut and come again type of salad, and that's a lot of the salad that I grow, is those kind of cut and come again types, because I feel that you get a lot more out of them than you do for kind of like the heading lettuce, like the romaines, where you kind of cut them all off and then you would sow something else in that place. Let's talk about another leafy vegetable, which is Swiss chard, and I adore Swiss chard. I love it in minestrone. I love it braised with some onions. I absolutely adore Swiss chard. I even add it to smoothies. So I grow quite a lot of Swiss chard, and we grow Vulcan Swiss chard, which is a red stem variety. But we also grow this 5-colour silver beet Swiss chard, which is another kind of heirloom variety, but it has all these different colours, so it's kind of a surprise which one's going to grow and what colour stem that you're going to be getting when you sow the seed, which I really enjoy. And you know, Swiss chard it can get to be a big plant. Like the leaves can make some sort of parasol or umbrella at times. But the beautiful thing about Swiss chard is it looks wonderful in the vegetable garden because it adds that flash of colour amongst the green. And people that are really kind of good with styling gardens and designing them, when you're pairing, like flowers like nasturtiums and things like that with tall, leaves of the Swiss chard, it looks really lovely. And, Swiss chard's always something that when I get new people visiting the garden and they're looking at it, they always ask, hey, what's that? That looks really interesting, because of that beautiful striking colour on the leaves. So Vulcan and 5-colour silver beet, they are very straightforward to grow. You just kind of sow the seeds and they kind of just grow up on their own. You can have them as small kind of baby leaf and use those as salads, or you can let them grow and get big and you can use them in all sorts of things, from soups, casseroles, just sauteing them, and even using them in kind of gratins and stuff like that. There's lots of recipes for Swiss chard, and they're packed full of nutrients and vitamins and stuff as well, which is kind of another reason why I like them. One of the reasons why some people don't like them, though, is they kind of have a bit of a strong, almost salty flavour as well, kind of like beet greens. They can be kind of salty as well, which some people like, some people don't. Sticking with the leafy theme, some other kind of leaves that we like to grow a lot of, and that are easy to grow for a new gardener as well, are sort of these kind of big leafy greens like mustards, also kales. But also Asian greens like Mitsuna and Tatsoi, Komatsuna, which is something that I started growing this year and late last year, and I definitely add that to the rotation of the plants to grow. I mean, Komatsuna is like a mustardy spinach, and it makes a great spinach substitute when it's too cold for spinach. But it's got this like mild sweet flavour that's kind of like spinach, but it's got a lot of vitamins and minerals and stuff in it. So there's a lot that you can do with this particular green, and I'd like to see a lot more people growing this green actually, because it's just, I don't know, I think it's really delicious. I mean, it's got loads of calcium in it, beta carotene, vitamins A, C, K. There's just so much nutrients in there that I really think that for those of you that are growing, to grow your own food, that's definitely something to take a look at because it's so loaded with nutrients. Same with mustards. Mustards are jam-packed full of, vitamins and minerals anyway. And we like to grow a few of them, like green wave mustard is a really popular one that we grow. We also grow a lot of bird, which is spelt BYRD. And this is an heirloom variety as well that's got that real classic kind of mustard punch. Which is really, really delicious. And we like to use that in a lot of different recipes. But there's some really cool new varieties of mustard that are starting to come on the market as well. There's definitely a few open source varieties that are making their way out there, which look really cool to try. And one of them that I would like to try is Dragon Feathers Mix and Eclipse. Now, Eclipse might have got thrown in there because I've got a thing for space themed stuff, and I did a whole post about a space themed garden and varieties that were literally something to do with space. So that looks like a really cool variety because I'm a total space nerd. But actually, like the whole like look of the plant, it's got this kind of really cool like frilly, crinkly kind of look to it, and it looks very cold hardy as well. It looks like it's one of those leaves that if you have it as a small leaf in like a kind of spicy sort of salad mix, it would give a lot of loft to that salad, so it would look like there's more on the plate, which is great for those of us who are dieting. But also the Dragon Feathers Mix is this beautiful mixture of different mustard leaf textures as well, that just and colours as well, which looks just super, super beautiful. So that looks like something that would be really cool to grow in the garden. And another variety that has this beautiful like colour to it is a variety called Dragon's Tongue, and it's got this like green and purple veining in there, which looks really striking in the garden. And, having something that looks appetizing to the eye as well, is a lot to be said. If it's looking beautiful in the garden, it's looking beautiful on the plate. Like it looks a lot more appetizing, and, we're more likely to try it and eat it. Okay, now I couldn't be talking about kind of leaf crops without talking about kale, okay? And kale, there seems to be like two camps. You either love it or hate it. And if you're tuning into this from England, then you will definitely know that brown spread that goes on your toast or maybe even your crumpets, and the ads like you either love it or hate it, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. I love it. I also really love kale. And I think it's because I was, exposed to it when I was young. My auntie used to grow it, and I would kind of eat it out of her garden super fresh. So I really, really love kale, and I'm sorry if you don't love kale, maybe fast forward through this bit of the podcast. But there's a number of kale varieties that I grow, and I grow a lot of. So I always grow Ragged Jack or Red Russian variety. It's very, very winter cold hardy. It does really well in my garden every year, and that is one that we grow regularly. I also grow North Star Polaris kale, again, space nerd. There was a definite reason behind us growing that one. And there is another variety that we grow, which is called Bare Necessities, which is this kind of really cool, frilly looking kale that's just really fun to grow, and it's very sweet. It grows well in the garden, grows well over winter. I also like the lactinato or the dinosaur kales, also known as like the Tuscan kales. They're kind of like this loose leaf kind of cabbage thing. They grow very well for me it's something that we grow a lot of. I even find like the dog occasionally will nibble at the kale, especially in winter when it's kind of sweet. Like the dogs seem to love to eat kale. I don't know. Maybe it's because they can't get grass. I don't really know. But kale is definitely something that I enjoy a lot of in various forms in the kitchen. And actually, even when it's a baby leaf, I can get my family to eat it. So we'll grow a lot of kind of salad mixes or those kind of cut and come again type lettuce leaves that I mentioned earlier. But we'll also grow kind of kale for it being a baby leaf kale, and then we'll let it get kind of big and established over the summer, because during summer these kind of brassicas tend to get kind of bitter and not tasting so great in the hot summers here in Utah. And then we'll wait until the winter comes, and then we'll harvest some little leaves again after winter. But then we'll just kind of leave them in the ground, and then the next year we'll let them flower, and all the bees come to the yard for those flowers. And then, in the last couple of years, we've actually saved seed from a number of these plants, and we've just kind of let them cross and do what they wanted to do in the garden. So in the next year, I think is going to be kind of interesting. So I'm going to be growing out some of these varieties and saving the seed again. And I'm really curious to see what is going to be happening when I sow those seeds out. So that's kind of an exciting side project that I've been working on. And that kind of goes back to having varieties that grow and adapt to your garden and where you're living. And if you're curious about that, then definitely check out the landrace episode, because that will be kind of cool for you to listen to if that's something that you're interested in. One of the things that I have been definitely looking every year is for some kale that I could get in the UK, and unfortunately it wasn't one that I brought with me when I moved, but it was a Jersey walking stick kale, and these were ones that would get super tall. They had a very woody stem that you could literally use as a walking stick. So if any of you guys ever see that whilst you're looking to purchase seeds, send me a message on the Facebook group and let me know where it was that you saw that, because that is one that I have wanted to grow for a number of years since I've moved here to the US, and I would love to get hold of some of those seeds. All right, enough about kale. Let's talk about something that might be a little bit more appetizing, maybe. Let's talk about beets. Because beets are, again, super packed full of, vitamins and minerals, and they're really easy to grow as well. Now, Detroit Dark Red or Bull's Blood are very popular varieties, as are the gold coloured ones, which are something that I tend to grow a few of. My husband doesn't quite like the taste of them as much as I do, but I think they're really fun to see on the plate. Is this beautiful kind of dark ruby red along with this gorgeous golden yellow colour. But actually one of the favourites that I grow, and I grow a lot of, is a variety called McGregor's Favourite. And one of the reasons why I grow that, and it's a red variety and it's an old variety, but I grow it because it reminds me of listening to my mom and my grandmother reading the Beatrix Potter books to us. And when I was little, my sister and I went to Beatrix Potter's house as kids. So, growing kind of McGregor's favorite beets is kind of like, oh, Mr. McGregor's garden, I'm growing something. Oh, maybe Peter Rabbit's going to show. I mean, I hope Peter Rabbit doesn't show up in my garden. I would not be happy if I had a bunch of rabbits showing up in my garden either. So I can completely empathize with Mr. McGregor, unfortunately. But that's one of the reasons why I grow that variety, and I really like the beets too. They are a little, they're not quite as pretty looking as some of the others, but they have a more cylindrical type of root to them. And the leaves themselves have got this really like beautiful kind of glossy sheen to them, like almost kind of iridescent. But the plants themselves are very productive, very vigorous, and they produce very well. And if you get them when they're young, like don't forget about them. So they're size of a softball or anything, because then they're not going to be good. But get them when they're young and small, and they're super tender and delicious. Now, another one for the root veg would be rutabagas, or Swedes as they're known in the UK. And I have two favourites of these that I love to grow. One is Joan and the other is Major Doon or Major Don. And both of them grow really, really well for where I live. They do take a bit of time to grow, so they're definitely one that you want to start early. But the ones that you get at the grocery store here, they're tiny, absolutely tiny. They're like the size of a tennis ball, whereas the ones in the UK are a lot bigger, and that's what I'm used to. And these two varieties produce, big, heavy roots that are very good. We also grow a lot of turnips, and I recommend, if you like that kind of peppery bite, turnips are a really good variety, or a really good plant, to grow. And a good variety would be purple top or purple top Milan. They're a great, heirloom variety to grow, and we've had a lot of success growing those. We grow them pretty much every year. Same with rutabagas too, and these were things that I didn't think I would be able to get my family to eat. In terms of vegetables, like, turnip greens and stuff, that they'll eat them, but, it's not something that they, would readily add to a meal. But turnips and rutabaga, especially if I'm making things like, a hot pot or a stew or something, like I just pop some of those in, and it definitely ups everybody's veggie count. So they're definitely a reliable, heavy producing, vitamin rich vegetable that you could be growing in your garden. But if you're growing, veggies and stuff because you're, trying to move away from the grocery store, or you're wanting to be a little bit more self-sufficient, you can't ignore like calorie crops, right? So things like your beans and corn tend to be, your calorie crops. Beans are a great source of protein. There's lots of different varieties of beans, whether you prefer like bush beans or pole beans. I like to grow a lot of pole beans, because it takes up less space, and I find that they're easier to harvest. But we've grown a number of bush beans, and one of my favourites to grow is dragon's tongue. They're very beautiful. They've got this kind of pale yellow pod with these purple flecks on them, and they produce really, really well. So as a new gardener, those dragon tongue beans are one of the first things that I recommend, to people who are asking me like, hey, what should I look at growing here? I really want to grow some beans. What's a good variety? Another one is also Provider. That is a good green bean as well. And for those of you that are wanting to grow pole beans, there's a lot of good choices out there. Good Mother Stallard is one that we grow regularly, and we get really good harvests off those. I also really like the Eye of the Goat, and I will probably butcher the pronunciation of this, so I am so sorry for all of you who speak Spanish. The Ojo de Cabra, that was a very, very heavy producing bean for us to grow. So if you can get hold of those seeds, that's a cool one to do. And sometimes I really like to grow beans because they've got like a fun name, or they look different. Like Red Swan is this beautiful like red podded variety, and they've got these pretty pink flowers as well. But in terms of beans, there's one particular one that I'm really excited to try, and that's the Taiwan yard-long bean. And these things can reach like over 3 feet in length. And the beans themselves look a lot like cowpeas. And, I grew Asian beans for the first time this year, and they were a little bit hit or miss. But I think that was because of where I had located them in the garden. It was a little bit cooler. So I think if I moved them somewhere warmer, they would do a lot better. But you get a lot more bean for the plant, right? Because they're growing so long. I mean, red noodle beans are like 18 inches long. But this yard long bean, 3 feet of bean, I'm really interested to see how that would grow, and how well that would do. And, reading through one of the catalogs, apparently there's beans that can get even longer out in Asia. So that's kind of interesting to see. So that will be a cool one to try. But another one that I am really excited to try and get my hands on at some point would be the corn planters beans. Some of these can get to be really, really big in size. And there's a few of them that are available. So those are ones that I would definitely look to. Sometimes they're called like a cornfield variety or a corn planter. Those ones I think I would try to get my hands on. As well as some of the Italian varieties of beans. Oh, I love Italian food. So I love anything kind of that I can use in different Italian cooking. I love drying beans. My favorite is the Borlotti climbing type of bean, or the cannellini beans as well, like both of those. Sticking with the bean theme, we're going to talk a bit about some broad beans or fava beans. And I know fava beans are kind of a weird, love it or hate it kind of deal for a lot of people. Fava beans are one of those things that are definitely a staple in the garden in the UK. And one of the neat things about favas or broad beans is you can sow them in fall if you live in a mild climate, and then they'll just pop up in spring, and you can have an early, harvest of some beans. They're pretty good in terms of, their nutrient value as well. And one of my favorites to grow is a Provecho Select. And they are the biggest broad beans I have ever seen in my life, and I was able to grow a bunch of them. So if you were able to get your hands on that variety, definitely. I mean, I've tried growing lots of different varieties here. I've tried Windsor and some of the other varieties in the UK, and I could never get them to grow, but Aprovecho Select grew well, and it produced heavy crops. And I really like fresh fava beans. You could do them with some onion and garlic, or maybe a little bit of bacon, on some real good sourdough bread. Oh, it's brilliant. But they're a good producer of beans early in the season because they can tolerate that cooler weather, whereas your pole beans and your bush beans, I mean, a little bit of frost and those things keel right over. So if you're looking to stem that hunger gap, which is between your last harvest in fall and winter, and when you start harvesting things in spring, definitely look to having fava beans there in your garden. Now, of course, we couldn't be talking about, some varieties of plants to kind of start with and things that look kind of cool and new to do without talking about tomatoes, because tomatoes are like the gateway plant for a lot of people growing your garden. And maybe it was for you too. Maybe your gateway plant was a tomato as well. And I would love to know what variety of tomato was the first one that you ever grew. So if you do, come on over to the Facebook group and let me know what variety of tomato that you grew. But let's talk about some of the fun favorites, right? Amish paste is, a very good paste tomato. The San Marzano tomatoes are also highly recommended for a tomato for paste and canning. I've never grown those San Marzanos, actually. I've always stuck with the Amish paste ones because they've been such a reliable producer. But there's cool varieties that we're trying all the time, and this year we tried a variety called Eagle's Beak that was a very heavy, big tomato that grew, and that was a Russian variety. So it produced early in the season. It was great as a slicer, great in salads, great on sandwiches, those kind of things. And it looked really, really cool. It was this kind of, reddish pink, blushed with yellow on there, and that was pretty cool. Another variety that was really cool, that was difficult to get hold of though, was called Fox's Nose. But that was really fun to grow because it was, bright orange like the pelt of a fox, and it had this kind of teardrop shape to it. So that was a cool variety. But one that I think is well worth trying in the garden is the Abe Lincoln variety, and you want to try and get hold of the strain from the 20s. They produce very big tomatoes and they're delicious. So that's one that could be cool. But also, we see a lot of tomatoes with different colors, a lot of grape tomatoes that have got these, purple, blue and green kind of flecks to them. Like, there's a lot of really cool things in the tomato, and especially if you're looking for something that looks a bit new and exciting on your plate, then a variety that you might want to consider is Berkeley tie-dye green, which is this like lime green with these red and orange streaks on it. It looks super cool. Also the bumblebee, cherry tomato. So there's a yellow bumblebee, a purple bumblebee, and a pink bumblebee. Those are delicious and they look really neat as well. So those are a couple of tomatoes that you could add that look kind of exciting. There's also the solar flare tomato, which, solar flare, space nerd again. That's a really pretty one because it's got this, yellow streaking in a kind of orangey red tomato. But one of the best tasting tomatoes that's often very highly recommended is Brad's Atomic Grape tomato. And those look very unusual. There's these different, purple, red streaks on those tomatoes. And they're kind of a greenish yellow underneath the streaks. But again, cherry tomatoes that are very sweet tasting and delicious are often a great way to introduce kids to eating tomatoes and things as well. There's another variety that was super sweet that a friend grew called Ice's Candy, and they were amazing. Like it really was like eating candy, but a healthy kind of candy, right? Because it was a tomato. So don't let your fear of kind of what something looks like sometimes limit your choices for what you're going to grow in the garden. And if it's something that you think you might want to try, but you don't want to devote a lot of money towards the seeds, maybe you could ask a friend or another gardener who, you're friends with, or a family member, somebody who, maybe has a lot of seeds and, would be maybe willing to share some. So maybe you could do a little bit of a seed swap between your friends and family, to be able to try some different varieties, or share ones that you have. And then that's a great way to be able to share things that you're not necessarily fond of, but give an opportunity for somebody else to try growing them as well. And the last plants that I'm going to talk about are, ones that are often recommended for growing is winter squash, right? It's great for, it's a calorie crop. It has a lot of nutrients and things in them, and they're relatively straightforward to grow. They just need a little bit of space. And, one that I often recommend a lot of is the Marina di Chioggia pumpkin, or the Italian sea pumpkin, because it's been a very prolific producer. It's also very delicious, and it looks pretty gnarly. Some people can be put off by that, but if you're looking for something that could be decoration on your table as well as being delicious, that's a great variety to go for. Also, the Amish pie and the winter luxury pie pumpkins are great for, making pumpkin pie, if that's something that you really enjoy to do. But another one that has been pretty good for a lot of gardeners is the Pennsylvania Dutch Crookneck. And this is one that is a good producer of, fruits that can be 10 to 20 pounds. And they're very easy to use and to prepare in the kitchen. They're very versatile and they're a good keeper as well. So that's definitely things to consider for your garden. And, whether if you're a squash fan, right, is this something that you're going to get through quickly? Because, things like your summer squashes don't last very long, and some of your winter squashes, some of them store better than others, like Hubbard's store very well, but then things like your honeyboat squashes or your delicata squashes don't store as long as some of the others. Spaghetti squash is also another really good squash to grow, and one that we grow a lot of and also recommend other people grow too, because it's such a great substitute for your normal kind of wheat pasta. There's a lot of times and a lot of meals where we'll switch out the wheat pasta for spaghetti squash instead. But there's a couple of squashes that I think would be quite exciting and definitely sort of new. I've not seen these a lot before in the catalogues. One is South Anna Butternut, which is one that's got some really good downy mildew resistance, as well as productivity. So if it's something that you struggle with, downy mildew in your garden, then definitely look at that South Anna Butternut. And one of the others was a variety called Desert Spirit Landrace. And this has got a lot of different shapes, sizes. It's pretty beautiful, and it's really cool to kind of see what's going to grow out of that. And another one that was really, really cool to grow that I grew last year, this year, oh my gosh, 2020 is not quite over yet, but that was called Sacred Valley Landrace Squash, and that one grew really well, and it's not one that I often see, so again, kind of going back to what we talked about in last week's episode, sometimes if you see something and it looks pretty cool, and it's something that you might want to have in your seed bank, then if you're able to, then you might want to see about getting it, because sometimes things sell out and they don't always get replaced back into the seed catalog, so sometimes you kind of miss out. But there's lots of resources out there for you to see if it is available, whether you can pick it up through a seed exchange or something like that. So I would love to know from you what your favorite varieties are to grow and what you would recommend to a friend who's starting a garden. Like, what varieties would you tell them to grow? But I also want to know what's exciting you this year. Like, what have you seen in the catalogue that you think that's something I really want to try this year? Let me know in the Facebook group. I'll pop the link in the description. And until next week, I hope your garden grows beautifully. Bye bye.